Hello. Look at this, Daily Telegraph. Having worked in news media of some sort, I can tell you that the most terrifying thing to any news hound or editor or writer of any sort, the most terrifying thing is for a member of the royal family to pop his or her clogs on a Saturday night or a Friday night, because that's when the big papers are coming out. And you'd have to change the whole front pages and the magazines and everything. Now, in an era of digital printing, it might be a bit simpler, but even so. Do you remember that Janis Joplin comment? Newsweek or Time or someone were doing a front cover article about her, and Eisenhower died. And she made some snarky comment about, oh, that guy goes and dies just when I've got my chance to be on the front of Time, something like that. I could understand her frustration. And actually, that's interesting, because if you didn't like Janis Joplin, you would regard that as a sign of her selfishness. But actually, it was a reasonable comment to make in the circumstances. I certainly don't think any the less of her for having said that. And that sort of thing is going to come up in this video. You see, I was going to make a video about Prince Philip's rather outspoken comments, and some of them are very funny. But that'll have to wait because of something else that's intervened. So this is another video about Prince Philip, and then there'll be another one probably with Prince Philip. They're referred to as gaffes, but I don't think most of them were gaffes. This was a gaffe that I'm going to be talking about now. But even so, that doesn't say that he's a bad person. Right, so yesterday I made that video giving my immediate feelings after the death of Prince Philip. And I have to tell you, I didn't spend a very happy Friday. I wasn't wandering about in sackcloth and ashes, tearing my hair and wailing or anything like that. But I have to tell you, I wasn't a happy bunny. Prince Philip has been at the side of the Queen for my entire life, apart from what he did for the country. He was a permanent fixture in my perception of the world, and it's difficult to get my head around him not being there anymore. So that's my psychological position. I made that short obituary, and I got many comments underneath the video, very nice comments, commiserating with the Queen and the British people. And then I got a whole lot of spiteful bastards celebrating his death because of one comment he made during an interview. That's all they can think of. So, although I've been busy compiling that list of Prince Philip shockers, that's going to wait. And I'm going to dedicate this video to the Great Virus comment, because I'm not ashamed of it, and I don't think the Prince was either. I acknowledge it was tactless, but there's tactless and there's intention. And what he said certainly didn't involve any intention. Somewhere I have a quote, I'll get to that in a minute, a quote he made when he was quite a young man about his big mouthness. Okay, first of all, it's quite obvious to me that the sort of people who picked on that one comment that he made did so more through jealousy and spite than for any regard for humanity. And this is what they were talking about. His Royal Highness, and I'm using the full title deliberately to annoy the people about whom I was just talking, His Royal Highness was discussing ecology. He was very worried about the state of the world and the damage that overpopulation was doing to it, and this was long before most others were talking about this. He said the biggest problem was overpopulation, that the planet could not sustain the number of people filling it up, and that some sort of voluntary family limitation was the only solution to a situation that would otherwise result in war or disease, to reduce the population instead to sustainable numbers. Now, quite honestly, I think one of the reasons that China is sort of tooling up for war is because they now have an overpopulation of boys as against girls. And when you get too many men in relation to women, you will have to find some way of occupying the men, and war is a good way of doing it. So, population balances and statistics do matter, but that's a video for another occasion. You can definitely argue with Prince Philip's position. After all, he was a man who had 4 children. Mind you, that was at a time when overpopulation wasn't considered. It was just after a war. Overpopulation wasn't considered such a thing. But he did have this opinion at the time he was making this interview, and it was an honestly held opinion, and he didn't beat about the bush about it. He then said that if he could be reincarnated, he would choose to be a virus that would reduce the world's population. And this is what is quoted by every bastard who says this means he's a terrible man. I haven't quite heard worse than Hitler yet, but I'm sure it's being used, and the concept is hanging there in the air anyway. First of all, the prince was outspoken. Here's the quote. I've been looking for it. Here it is. He was about 20, and he wrote to a relative who'd lost a son in battle during the war. And he said, now, what was it? I know you will never think much of me. I'm rude and say many things out of turn, which I realise afterwards must have hurt someone. Then I'm filled with remorse and I try to put matters right. Okay, so it's a characteristic he acknowledged when he was young. Secondly, Prince Philip was a Christian, and by definition, a Christian cannot believe in reincarnation. So the whole thing he was talking about was completely hypothetical. Thirdly, he didn't say, for instance, now this would have been the words of a terrible man. He didn't say he hoped that someone would invent a virus to kill millions, which is actually what has happened. But that's another story again. He didn't say that. He just talked about himself coming back as a virus, which means what he was saying was he'd be willing to come back as the lowest of the low to save the planet. I still don't think it was good phraseology. But seeing as the institutions and organisations which he did set up, which he did patronise, which he did work for, were all dedicated to saving human lives, I would respectfully, or in the case of some of these bastards, not so respectfully, submit that the comment he made defines his life about as much as Boris Johnson quoting Homer in the original Greek makes him a world authority on classical literature. But as I said, there's no accounting for the spite of people who know they will never get the chance Prince Philip had to do good and to be great. Now, that was Prince Philip's lucky break. It was a very lucky break. We can't all of us be in the sort of position he was to influence and to make marvellous changes in people's lives through that influence. But we can certainly admire someone who got into that position and acted honourably within it. A male consort, especially a consort of any monarch, is in a slightly awkward position, but a male consort of the Queen is always in a very awkward constitutional position. They haven't sorted that out since they were talking about that during the time of Queen Elizabeth I, and she never married. And part of the reason was because of the constitutional position that her husband would have had. And she didn't want to, at a time when men took charge, she didn't want to be in that position. And even today, the constitutional position of male consort of the reigning monarch is a sort of fifth wheel. Basically, all that was asked of Philip constitutionally was that he impregnate the Queen. That was it. Job done. And apart from, and this was a man who had been a sailor, a good one, a man of action, a war hero. He loved the sea, but he had to give it up because as the royal consort, he had too many official engagements to be a serving officer. But he made the best of it. I could go, it would take too much time. Now, I do urge you to look at how his Duke of Edinburgh awards changed and actually saved lives. He's made the most astonishing impact on thousands of British people who would otherwise have been lost, including there's one famous story of a kid. He was in jail for stabbings, second time, and he's now owning his own catering business. He learnt a lot of, he joined the Duke of Edinburgh Awards while he was in prison. And when he came out, it gave him the framework to make something of his life, where many people who come out of prison just go straight back to their old lives. Anyway, let's contrast Prince Philip's making of what he had, what life had given him. Let's contrast that with a certain person who got into the royal family quite recently, also by very lucky chance, and was put into a similar position, that is, as a fifth wheel, but the opportunity to make good of that anyway. But that person didn't like to be a fifth wheel and opted out of this constitutional subordinate position, which would have given huge chances to change lives. Instead, the only opportunity seized was a lucrative deal with Netflix or Disney or whatever. Of course, to some, this person is still a saint because this person hasn't said anything about being a virus yet. But then, perhaps there was no need. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.